All right, Christoph Trappe, thank you so much for being a part of the podcast. How's it going?
Doing great. How about you?
Doing just fine. Doing just fine. So first, I just, you are. So for folks that aren't familiar with Christoph, he's, I think what I see his name most on is the Business Storytelling Podcast, which you have amassed, I know, well over 200 episodes at this point. But can you give a little bit of an introduction? Just tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, you bet. I'm a content marketer. Currently run content strategy at Vox Pop Me, video research basically for brands and marketers and anybody that needs to do research. And of course, I got the Business Storytelling Podcast, still publishing daily, which is interesting. A month out. So lots of episodes in the hopper. As you can see, I'm a planner. Published my third book earlier this year, Content Performance Culture. Always interested in how do we create better content, how do we stay relevant, and how do we try new channels. So I'm always excited to talk to people like you, and of course you were a guest on my show. How do you do live streams? How do you do better podcasts? How do you do video podcasts? And video podcasting, it will become a thing on Spotify and other channels before we know it. It's not open for the public yet, but it will be at some point. I mean, no doubt in my mind.
I love that, and yeah, I think that's probably part of the reason too why I think I started a podcast, or at least something I'm finding a great benefit to, is just learning so many things from so many different people. And so, wow, you listed off a lot there: books, podcasts, all the other content marketing work you do, the research for companies. I mean, how do you do it all? How do you fit all that in?
Well, first of all, you can't do everything, right? You have to figure out, you pick your battles, and you have to find the best technology to use. So I'll give you an example. I do a live stream. I actually just did one right before the recording, and so the live stream is already live. And the other thing that happens with the live stream is it takes the mindset out of people that we can edit, because we can't, because we're live. So all the people that are nitpicky, that kind of goes out the window because it's already live. Then I put it on the podcast channels. Then I write an article sometimes from it. So I try to integrate everything everywhere as much as possible.
Yeah, I've noticed that. I like, and your website, authenticstorytelling.net. Yeah, I love how you kind of turn all the podcasts into a little bit longer form articles, pulling quotes from the podcasts and get them up. I love that integrated approach. And, when so you mentioned earlier, I was on your podcast, it's been maybe a couple months back now. When I was first asked to join, I was like, okay, let me do a little bit of research. The folks at Switcher sent me a link to some of your work, and first thing I noticed was just look at all, so many posts, not just on the website, but then I go to the Twitter and I'm like, I saw like 20 tweets a day or something like that. So how are you, so clearly you have a very high post frequency, and this all goes into the integrated aspect of it. But, how are you kind of managing all of the publishing side of this stuff?
Yeah. So first of all, so on social, I use Buffer, right? I mean, it's just there's like 10 posts a day roughly. Maybe I don't know. Maybe that's not the right number. I think that's what it is. And you just every time I have something to say, I put it in the queue, and it goes at the end of the queue, and it's usually full, 100 posts. That's the plan I have with Buffer. When it comes to blogging, I cut that back a little bit. So now I do about one article a week. Sometimes it's a shorter article. Like I blogged about the AirPods. One wasn't working, and I'm pretty sure it's going to perform just because a lot of people search for that kind of stuff. And it's like 300 words, and nobody will care, right? So you just have to tie it all together and find ways to get it done. Sometimes, as Seth Godin said on my show, he said, I publish an article every day. Sometimes they're not very good. Sometimes they're really good. But at the end of the day, I publish something every day. And so I don't publish every day, but some things are really good. Some things are not. So that's kind of how it goes.
And how, that's interesting about I did see the article on the AirPods, and how, it's interesting. So, and I'd be curious just kind of what your like kind of content idea process looks like, because I feel like that would be something where like, oh, you experienced that issue. It's oh, other people might be experiencing this problem too. Maybe I should write an article about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of what happened. And all the search results, they kind of said what I said, but they didn't. They weren't very specific, quite frankly. They said clean them, but what does that mean, right? Like, how do you clean them? I don't know. Like, you really just blow on them. So, I tried to kind of set myself apart by just being more specific, and that's a good way to do that. I run across ideas all the time. I just did a show earlier. I did a podcast recording with Elaine Lindsay, and I don't usually do show notes. I don't usually do articles for specific podcasts unless it's a topic. So I will not do an article saying podcast episode 279 with Elaine Lindsay, blah blah blah. I'm not doing that. But she said two things that I already have articles on. So what I will do is I will actually take her podcast and a few quotes and put the right quotes into the right articles. And so I will enhance those articles, and then I will repurpose them and reshare them. If they haven't never performed, I might rewrite them. Depends how old they are. If they're 4 years old and they are not performing, might as well totally not start from scratch, but update them. And the other one, I know one performed pretty well, but now we have another expert in there, so that I'm going to share it with her, and she'll probably link to it. So I don't always create new just because that's in our heads. We have to create new. Sometimes it's easier just to, update what you have. But the ideas come from everywhere, we're talking, I might have an idea from this podcast. Like, for example, one idea might be, we should talk about how do you decide whether you should record the podcast or you should just go live. Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you decide? I don't know. I usually go live for some, and when I don't go live, I don't record audio. I don't record video, because I'm not going to use the video unless I go live. So why do I need to? So that's the story right there. I bet people are wondering about that.
Absolutely, and just curious with the when you do go back to maybe older articles and enhance them a little bit. That's so they're not necessarily going back to the top of your most recent article list. You'll just then take those and share them again, share them with the people that you then inserted quotes for and stuff like that.
No, and I do push them to the top as well, and then usually I put a note at the bottom and say this was updated, blah blah blah, whenever. Sometimes if they're not performing, so what I do is I look at the top, I don't know what it is, top 40% or something, or 50%. And if they're not in the top 50 after 3 years, they're probably never going to perform, and I just kill them. And I'll use part of the content and I update it. And sometimes, if it's 4 years ago, I don't like my tone, I don't like my voice, so I'll just, I might scrap it completely and start from scratch. So, yep.
And I want to go back to you live streaming your podcasts, or at least most of them. Why, of course, in addition to just kind of, I guess, getting video out of it through streaming, what are the benefits of going live with your podcast interviews?
Yeah, so the benefit that I see is you get on multiple channels. So I do that, and I think you do the same thing. I use Switcher to produce it, and then I use Restream to push it to all the different channels. And I go to YouTube, Twitter, Periscope, Twitch. I just do that because I can say Twitch. It doesn't really work that well, but it's kind of unique and different. And then what else? Facebook, LinkedIn. So realistically, all those things would take a lot of time if I would create separate videos to put them on LinkedIn on its own. First, I got to create it, then I got to upload it. It's so many more steps. YouTube, same thing. Like, I was talking to Pam Dittner the other day, and I said, YouTube doesn't really, it's not a ton of views, but at least it's there, right? And it doesn't take me any extra work to get it there. Could I put more effort into YouTube? Maybe. But so doing the live stream helps you get onto all those channels. And the other thing people have to remember, it's not just a live stream. It exists for a long time after, right? So for example, if I have 100 views on the live stream on Twitter, it could go up to 1,300 views on the replays, and that's been the best ever, I think. And then, so I'm trying to maximize the reach, And since it's relatively easy, I don't care if one or two channels don't perform because it didn't take me any more work other than clicking two toggles, to send them to two other channels.
One thing I like about YouTube too, I think it's when you're sharing those videos with guests or others, YouTube is very easily embedded into other websites and whatnot, which is nice. I also noticed Periscope is going away, and I remember during our the podcast that I was a part of, you had mentioned that was kind of your preferred, at least, streaming platform. And so and not that necessarily Twitter streaming is going away, right? It's just Periscope going away.
Just Periscope, and Periscope is owned by Twitter anyways. It's kind of silly because most of the people that watch my Periscopes, they're watching on Twitter anyways. So it's a little bit, you get a little bit of nostalgia going on or whatever, from my end, because I loved Periscope when it first came out. It wasn't integrated. So I say Periscope, but realistically, it's been Twitter for the last 3 years, even though there's still an app called Periscope where people couldn't watch it. But I think most of them watch it on Twitter.
Yeah, and until you said that, I had totally forgotten there was a Periscope app separate out there, even though if you're going live on Twitter, you have to have the app somewhere. And another streaming platform I know you've been trying lately is Amazon Live. What are your, and I know that's kind of fairly fresh for you, what are your initial thoughts on that?
I was struggling at first when I wanted to go on there because I was like, oh, let's just do like Black Friday. And I was like, what do I talk about? Like, I'm not a, salesperson. I just like, hey, check out this product, look, blah, 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 whatever. And so I had to kind of reframe how I think about it because I have to talk about things that are relevant to what I typically talk about. And so I have done that. So here's what I do. When I have a guest on the podcast that has a book, we will also live stream to Amazon Live. And so what I've done, I have a feed where you can put 40 items up in your feed on Amazon Live at a time. So when they have a book, I put their book first and I highlight it, I feature it because we're talking about that topic. And then my book is usually the second one. And then everybody else, I keep pushing them down one more until they rotate off. And so I just use that to basically another live stream platform. If they don't have a book, we don't go there. I don't force it. Every once in a while I thought about, oh, what's a good book? But it's kind of a stretch, It's like, oh, I like Joe Polizzi's book. Okay, so we'll highlight Joe. No, we're not talking to Joe, even though Joe is great and he's been on the show a couple times. But, that's too far of a stretch. The other thing I've done, I find other products, you can maybe not see it. See, I can show it to you. I don't know if you. So I got this new chair, and this is like a gaming chair, and it's awesome. So we did, my 6-year-old and I, we did like a, an Amazon Live, just talking about how it is, how it works, blah, blah, blah. And so that was just, we bought that. And then the other thing is, so then I did a couple sponsored ones for vacuum cleaners, which is it's a little bit of a stretch, but it's not, because I'm working at home, everybody else is home, and how do I vacuum clean and keep this place really nice without having to vacuum clean? So I did a live stream on these vacuum robots, which I run them every day now. Seriously, it's crazy. It's like an obsession. And my floor is just wonderful. So, but anybody that works at home might care about that. It's a little bit of a stretch. I don't typically talk about that kind of stuff. But now since we work at home, it's it's on the edges of what we all do.
Yeah, it's all kind of how you position it. I think kind of just I got to catch some of your Black Friday Amazon stream, and I kind of like the positioning of like, these are all of the tools and equipment I use at home. Also, the book and all that stuff I saw, but like you said, it is relevant for the time. How can we get the most productivity out of the work we're doing at home?
Exactly.
And so I guess, at least as of right now, I guess if there's not really a product involved, maybe Amazon Live doesn't make sense for the stream.
It doesn't, right? Then I wouldn't do it unless there's a product, then we won't go there.
So, aside from, the work you're doing on the podcast, so talk a little bit more about, I mean, you are kind of like a content marketing consultant in a way for larger businesses.
Well, I do that sometimes, but full time, my day job is at Vox Pop Me. So basically, run their content strategy, and they do. It's a SaaS company, a video platform to get customer insights through video, right? So you pick up your phone, and instead of doing a survey, you just say, "What do you like about the Business Storytelling Podcast?" And I say, "I love it because Christoph has the best hairstyles," for example.
And if somebody, if for those that are just listening to this and don't know Christoph, I mean, full head of hair on him.
I'm bald.
So you threw me off there, Christoph. That was a that was a good one. So in any of your if somebody does come to you for some content marketing consulting, or they say take a look at my site and kind of give me some recommendations, what's the first thing you're usually asking people, or what's the first thing you're usually kind of talking about when you go through stuff like that?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, what are you trying to accomplish? It's also It's also good to know, what are they like? What are the expectations? And I'll, totally honest, the clients I don't work with are the ones that do something like this. Hey, what would you do to help us with marketing? And I can give you some ideas, but I can't roll out a marketing strategy in 5 minutes. And if that's their expectation, probably not a good client, quite frankly. And then the worst clients are the ones that after 4 minutes interrupt me and say, well, we only have one more minute. And it's like, I go to my financial guy and say, hey, let's move over my 401k. And he's like, oh, that's not a 30-second discussion. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's a conversation. You have to get there. But you have to figure out, what are they trying to do? Is it a good fit? How can you help them? How can you help them within their budget? And so kind of that's where I typically start. And there's so many, there's some similarities in most problems that companies face, but there's also differences because what's interesting, it's a problem, but it's also great about digital marketing. Everybody kind of makes up their own little areas, right? So some teams have totally different roles than other teams. Now, as I said in the book, they all kind of fall into certain categories, but how it's exactly implemented changes. I mean, think about it. Like, some people, they have a webinar manager. Some people do this. Some people do other things, right? And it's kind of an interesting area. And you also see that when you talk about who's on your team. And some teams have directors of content, but those directors of content are really just writers, right? So why are they a director of content? At another company, they might be leading a team of 12 people. Do you know what I mean? So it's like there's all these differences in how people are implementing kind of the similar things. So you got to figure out, how can you help them? What's the problem? What are you trying to accomplish? And see if you want to do it. Especially when you help people with consultative advice, sometimes they're just looking for somebody that can be in charge of that area. That's really a thing, right? If it doesn't work, who can they blame? And that's going to be you. And so if that happens, just make sure you get the right price tag on it, so you can help them. You can help them have a chance to make it work, but that happens.
And I'm sure every job is different, but after those initial conversations and when you kind of hand over your recommendations, I mean, what are you giving people? Or is it? I'm sure it comes in all forms. Is it presentations? Is it like, here's a playbook?
Yeah, it comes in all forms. The biggest thing is with a playbook, you have to still implement it, right? I mean, you can't just say, here's our strategy, and now we never look at it again. It's an evolving thing, especially, remember, with COVID. I mean, stuff changed, and March 12th, everything blew up. If you had a conference the next week, your conference was not going to happen anymore. So, all these things change. So it all depends. I do like to put it to people in writing so they can implement it. But here's the other problem with just handing over documents is, it's like the NFL. How many, they come up with this game plan, but it only works for the first 10 plays, and then it's totally thrown out the window. Some guy who wasn't even looking that great on tape is all of a sudden blowing him up on one side or something like that. You know what I mean? They didn't plan for it, so now they got to change it. So at the end of the day, I can tell you have to lose weight, but until you cut your calorie intake, you're not going to lose any weight. The end, right? So make sure if you're going to pay somebody to help you with strategy, that you can actually that you're actually planning on implementing it.
And you mentioned your book as well, and you mentioned it at the top, but or at least the latest book. Can you just talk a little bit about what that is and kind of what folks can get out of it if they read it?
Yeah, content performance culture. So basically, everybody wants content to perform, even when they claim it's they don't really care. At the end of the day, they will ask, "Oh, is it performing? Is it working?" In fact, it goes so far. When Jason Falls, I just published that a little bit ago here on our podcast. He said, "Hey, set up your own UTM, parameters and a Bitly link, and then if it's working or not. So even if the client doesn't track it, so you can go back and say it's working and even if they don't ask, they will still wonder at some point." So the book talks about how do you implement a content performance culture. And the way it works is you really have to have the right culture. You have to have the right people in the right seats. You have to have all those things in place. And you have to allow people to actually create content. And even if you don't create new content, you do have to update existing content. You have to repurpose content. So I talk about that in the book. I cover a couple of new areas. There's a big chapter on podcasting in there. I should go back to that because there's been a lot of things I've learned even in the last year that are probably not even in there and updated. Maybe version 2 comes out next year. We'll see. 2021. I talk about virtual reality video, which is easier than ever to produce. So I'll give you some ideas how to do that. So it tries to help you understand how do you move forward. There was just a review file the other day. They talk about Christoph walks you through everything from the typo to something else to something else. That's another thing. You make a typo, go fix it. I'm not saying make typos on purpose. Get off my back. Hold the hate mail. Don't tweet at me. Don't at me, right? Don't slide into my DMs. I'm not saying do a typo on purpose, but if you have a typo, big deal. Don't stress on it. Fix it. The example I give in the book, Cathay Pacific had misspelled their own name on an airplane. So, and they just tweeted it and basically said, "Whoops, this one has to go back to the shop." And
beautiful.
Seriously, you have a typo on your website, that's going to cost you much less to fix than having to take an airplane back to the shop, which might not even be in the same city. You might have to fly there. So now it costs money in gas, to fly the plane back to Tulsa from wherever, somewhere else. I don't know. That's not Cathay Pacific, but you know what I mean.
Yes, and you mentioned all of these forms of content, podcasting, VR now, of course, website. It is easy, I think, to get overwhelmed by it all. I know me personally, sometimes I feel like I need to. It's been hard for me to give my attention to one thing. Like I want to start this podcast. Let me. But then in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, I have video. I want to get it on YouTube. I need to have a presence on LinkedIn, and I need, now I need to update my website. It's easy to get overwhelmed by it all, and I don't know. I can see where that would kind of force people to shut down a little bit. Is it important to kind of try to focus on one thing at a time, and maybe other things will come? I mean, what do you think about that?
Maybe other things will come. I don't know. But what I try to do is, what's the way that I can do something to be most efficient? And that's why I love the live streaming to multiple channels. The problem with LinkedIn is, first of all, you got to apply to be on LinkedIn. So you might not even get in there right away but apply. All they can do is turn you down. But find the easiest way to do all these things. I would not start with a live stream quite frankly. If I was doing it by myself, my first podcast, I wouldn't. My first podcast, I recorded in the Anchor app, and I still use Anchor today. And it was just me talking, right? Like walking around the trail or whatever, the track. And it was just me. I was just playing around. My first episodes are horrible. But anyway, I just tried it, right? Then I had the channels where Anchor would send them automatically. Then once it got going, I expanded to all the other channels, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music. And you do want to be on Amazon Music because if you ask Alexa to play your podcast, that's where it's pulling it from. Not really hard to do. I'm on Pandora, Apple. So anyway, you just add to the fray. And then at some point, I added live streams. And live streams at the beginning were super stressful because, I push all the buttons and I'm also doing the talking, interviewing. So it's kind of stressful the first couple times you do it, especially the fancier you get, the harder it can be. But really, I'm not a fan of saying, oh, let's just do one thing, because you're not setting yourself up to be successful. So if I say this, right, if I go, oh, we're doing a live stream, it goes to all these channels, then it goes to 20 podcast channels, then I'm doing an article, then I'm doing social media, then I'm doing an email campaign, then I'm doing a paid campaign. Like, if I literally can't make any of those work, like, I have to have some success somewhere. And some people, again, don't at me, right? Like, they're going to say, well, you're just throwing stuff at the wall. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm just being efficient, right? I'm still being strategic. I'm still being efficient with my content. I use the COPE model. And, that's kind of how you can set yourself up to success. I'll give you one example of what happened. I was at Staymates, and this is so long ago now, so now you can do a webinar and you can just live stream with one device, right? But this is so long ago. We had like 4 devices on different tripods, broadcasting to different networks.
Uh-huh.
So, but basically, it went through all these networks, and Periscope had like 10,000 views. Now, granted, not all of them were relevant views, but some of them were, because it was 10,000. So my point is, we would have never been able to do that if we didn't just do it, if we didn't just try it. Now, again, it wasn't as efficient as it is as today, because you need 4 devices for every network, one, and you still kind of do for Instagram, even though there is ways around it that I'm not a big fan on. Like, there's some apps out there, but set yourself up to succeed, and that's how you do it, in my opinion.
And I'm glad you mentioned equipment too, because I mean, it really, to produce a quality podcast today doesn't take a lot of money, and a lot of equipment. What are you using?
So all I use, honestly, whether I do live streams or even just the recorded audio, I use this usually, even though now Switcher came out with AirPod support. So I might start using that. I didn't want to test it today necessarily. But, on the Anchor app, I just use AirPods. Sounds great for the most part. Every once in a while, there's a hiccup. And then I use my iPad. That's what I'm looking at right now. It's on a tripod. Tripod costs like, I don't know, $18, maybe $22, something like that. And then I got a ring light on the top, which if I look up, you can kind of see it in my lights. But that's not even my ring light. That's my daughter's, So I use it when I go live. I probably could buy a better one, but it does the trick. She doesn't use it when I'm doing something. And that's really it. That's basically all I use. And then I got the computer for the Restream distribution, and I look at that, and I try not to look at every network. It gets kind of overwhelming when you look at every network and try to answer comments. So if I see some pop up, I'll try to respond on air, but you can't do everything. So as you said, the iPad wasn't just bought to live stream, so I use it for all kinds of other things. So the cost is actually pretty minimal.
Right. And I just a couple more things I want to touch on here before I let you go. You just briefly mentioned keynoting earlier, and that's something else I noticed. You do keynote events here and there, and what has it been like in the COVID environment? Keynoting. I know, I'm sure, like a high of keynoting is being in front of a crowd and kicking off an event, or kind of being the start of a big event. And now here we are in a virtual world. What is how has that kind of transition been when it comes to any of the keynote work you do?
I mean, it's not the same. I've given a couple keynotes this year, one in Istanbul, one in Istanbul, Singapore. I think that may be it, but it's not the same. I'm in the same spot right here. I don't get on a plane. I don't enjoy the trip. I don't see Istanbul, right? I go upstairs and see my family, even though the Singapore one was at 10:30 p.m. my time, so kind of late. It's not the same. I mean, and fewer and fewer people I think are tuning in. I think it's harder because we're on meetings all day long to begin with, right? Who wants to go on one more meeting? And that's really what it is. And I actually did write about the overabundance of PowerPoints on virtual. And what's interesting to me about that is, so we're split screen right now. So that's good to know, right? But if we had a PowerPoint, where's the PowerPoint going to go? Now, I know the answer because you use Switcher and you can make it full screen, or you can, have it a second screen or whatever. But some of these conferences, they have a little picture of me, and then they have the PowerPoint full screen. So it's like, it's not the same because I'm trying to be interactive, but the PowerPoint is like the overarching thing. And then some conferences, it's just a PowerPoint. You're not even on screen. And what's on a PowerPoint, honestly, that you need to look at for 2 minutes, right? And there is people, like I remember a guy, Yalif, who used to work at Twitter. He was on a panel with me at IMA a few years ago. And he goes through PowerPoints like this, like every 3 seconds he's on the next slide. But I don't, like, that's not really my style. But if you do that, and if you can pull that off, then it might work. But if you're on a PowerPoint slide, with a stock art image and 3 bullet points for 5 minutes, why does the PowerPoint need to be so prominent? Which that didn't used to be a problem with offline conferences, right? Because it's usually behind you on the side, right. So people don't have to look at it. But it's different when you have a screen. I
noticed that. I participated in an online or webinar a few weeks back, and looking at the recording, the like you said, the slides were so prominent, and we had so few of them and so little information on them, and our video was like this little box. And yeah, you kind of wonder. That's what I kind of like about tools like Switcher Studio and some of the live streaming softwares, is at least you can play with, if I needed to bring a slide up, I could almost do half and half screen if I wanted, or I could do, a big kind of angle my slide in a way that it's large enough for people to read, but you're still kind of center. So I like stuff like that. But yeah, I have heard feedback on virtual events. I heard an interesting piece of feedback the other day on this, and this may be a little bit of a tangent, but I'd be eager to hear your thoughts. And I was part of a virtual conference last week, and some feedback I got on the overall conference. Obviously it was 2 days all online, and someone said that they felt like they were able to, because of the tools like chat pods and whatnot, they were able to connect better with fellow audience members, like while a presentation was going on. And like if you're in person and there's a presentation going on and you're talking to somebody, it's kind of rude. You don't want to network like during a session. But with virtual events, you can do stuff like that, and they were pleasantly surprised at how much they were actually able to connect despite being online and not actually seeing anybody in person. I mean, that's kind of an interesting way to look at it.
It is, but I don't know. I haven't had that. I haven't had that experience, honestly. It's just been very different connecting with people, and you don't run into people, and the people you run into. So let me give you this example. So we interact on Twitter, right? So if we see each other in a chat room at a conference, like, who cares? Like, we see each other all the time. Like, you know what I'm saying? But if we see each other at a conference in person, we might go, hey, what's going on? Hey, if it's 5 o'clock, we might go have a beer and just hang out for a minute. Very different experience. So I do, as I said in the article, I actually think conferences will advance. It's not going to happen overnight. But so, for example, VR video, I can totally shoot. I've done this before. I can shoot my presentation in VR. Now, I don't really have the setup for it to be super interesting, right? I mean, there's a treadmill over here. I got an office treadmill, which you may have seen on my Amazon Live. I got a sofa over here, and then there's a chair. But I could, in theory, put a VR camera here and then give a presentation, and you can put your headset on wherever you are, and you can look around where I am. So the more we figure that out, it could become more interesting. Of course, the next level, now I'm dreaming, is you have a headset on, the person sitting next to you, and you can talk to them. Now we're talking, right? Now
Yeah.
that's, I think we're a little ways from that, but think about that. I mean, that's a different experience. And I mean, you and I chatting in a chat box at a conference, while we do it on Twitter all the time, it doesn't. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not. I don't see that being that awesome or
Yes.
different.
Well, and so lastly, speaking of just kind of think what things will look like moving forward, and you mentioned virtual reality being easier than ever to shoot. What is, I'm sure there are a lot, this could probably be its own podcast, and I'm sure it will, but what do any big ideas for 2021, or, what do you see kind of blowing up? Is it virtual reality? Is it something else?
Well, virtual reality has, had a number of springs or falls or whatever you want to call it, but I think it's still too hard for people to consume. Honestly, I have a headset. I never use it for anything. So maybe not next year, but I think it will become more and more common. Right now, there's not enough content. There's some content in some verticals, but I think if you don't do a podcast, if you don't do a live stream, you should at least give it a shot for a year and see if you can hit the market, especially when there isn't a lot of other podcasts talking about that topic, and it really can help you get out there. It can help you connect with people. I mean, think about it. Like, we're just having a conversation, right? Once you start thinking about podcasting, like you're just having a conversation, first of all, it is actually, it's nice because you talk to other people. Second of all, you can learn something. I mean, I did the show with Elaine, and she was talking about Google My Business, and I learned something new about Google My Business, and I was like, oh, I better do that right now. So you always learn something, and then you can, get it in front of people, and people can actually learn about you and your company. And assuming you're not a jerk, should help your company.
And hopefully, as 2021 rolls around and the COVID vaccine is more widely available, more and more people will be probably commuting again. Great time to start a podcast.
Absolutely. But yeah, I got them running all day long. I mean, in the background, it's like my new radio. When I'm writing, not a big fan of them in the background, but I mean, I do keyword research or something like that. There's no reason I can't have background voices.
All right. Well, I think that's a good way to end it, Christoph. Again, thank you so much. And just quickly, where's the best place for people to find your work?
Yeah, authenticstorytelling.net. You can always check it out there. That's my blog. Feel free to connect with me anywhere. Christoph Trapp on C-Trapp on Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever. If you connect with me on LinkedIn, please tell me where you saw me or where you heard my voice, because I hate those messages when people say, Christoph, I noticed you're human. I'm human too. We have that in common. Let's connect. I think you're going to pitch me, so please don't.
Appreciate it, Christoph. Thanks so much for the time.